Victoria never imagined that the men she called uncle would become the reason she stopped trusting anyone. That night began with laughter in the house, with the smell of dinner lingering in the air, with the kind of ordinary evening that makes you feel safe, and it ended with her life permanently shattered. What happened behind those closed doors would remain hidden for months, protected by silence, by shame, by the very people who were supposed to protect her. This is the story of how trust became a weapon, how family became the most dangerous place to be, and how one woman's courage to speak out would expose a darkness that had been hiding in plain sight. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Stories like this need to be talked about everywhere. This is not just a crime story, it's about family betrayal, silence, and how abuse can hide in plain sight when everyone around you refuses to see it. It's about how the people who are supposed to love you can become the ones who hurt you most. Stay with me till the end, because what happened after Victoria finally spoke out shocked everyone, including the detectives who thought they had seen everything. This case would reveal that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from strangers on the street, it comes from the dinner table. Oak Ridge was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone. The houses were modest but well kept, with front porches where neighbors would wave to each other on Sunday mornings. The Martinez family had lived on Maple Street for over 15 years. It was a 3-bedroom house with peeling paint on the shutters and a garden that Victoria's grandmother used to tend before she passed away. The house always seemed full, not just with family, but with extended relatives who would drop by unannounced, stay for dinner, sometimes stay for weeks. In their culture, family was everything. You didn't turn away blood. You didn't question your elders. You certainly didn't speak badly about them to outsiders. These were the unspoken rules that governed everything in Victoria's world. Her mother worked double shifts at the hospital. Her father had passed away when Victoria was 12, and the uncles, well, they helped out. They were there when mom couldn't be. They brought groceries, they fixed things around the house, they gave Victoria rides to her community college classes. To the neighbors, to the people at church, they were good men. They were family. But no one knew what was happening when the doors closed and the lights went out. Victoria was 23 years old when everything fell apart, but in many ways, she was still that quiet girl who always tried to do the right thing. She was the kind of person who apologized when someone else bumped into her. She studied accounting at the local community college, worked part-time at a retail store, and spent her evenings helping her younger brother with his homework. Her friends described her as sweet, maybe too sweet, the kind of person who always put everyone else first. She had this habit of tucking her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, and she was nervous a lot. Victoria had grown up learning that respect meant silence, that family loyalty meant never questioning your elders, never making waves, never bringing shame to the household. Her mother had raised her with these values, and Victoria had internalized every single one of them. What made Victoria especially vulnerable wasn't weakness, it was trust. She trusted that family meant safety. She trusted that the men who had known her since she was a child, who had carried her on their shoulders at birthday parties, who had taught her how to ride a bike, would never hurt her. And that trust would become the very thing they weaponized against her. Clinton was the oldest, 47, with graying hair and a deep voice that commanded attention whenever he walked into a room. He was the one who made decisions for the family, who everyone turned to when there was a problem. He had this way of making you feel small without ever raising his voice. Just a look, just a tone that reminded you of your place in the hierarchy. Clinton worked in construction and had a reputation in the neighborhood as someone you didn't mess with, but also someone who would help you move furniture or fix your car if you asked nicely. Jude was 42, quieter than Clinton, more reserved. He observed more than he spoke. He had this unsettling quality of always seeming to know more than he let on. He worked night shifts at a warehouse and would often be at the house during the day when Victoria's mother was at work. He was the one who would offer to drive Victoria to class, who would show up when she was home alone, who always seemed to have a reason to be there. And then there was Peter, the youngest, at 38, who everyone thought was the fun uncle. He joked around, he teased. He was the one who would bring pizza on Friday nights and make everyone laugh with his stories. But his jokes went too far. His comments sometimes crossed lines that made Victoria uncomfortable, and when she would tense up or try to change the subject, he would laugh and tell her she was too sensitive, that she needed to lighten up. These three men had been constants in Victoria's life since childhood. They were her father's brothers, and after her father died, they stepped in. Or that's what everyone said. They stepped in. The comments started small. Peter would say something about how Victoria was growing up, how she was becoming a woman now, how she should be careful about the way she dressed around the house. At first, Victoria thought he was just being protective, the way uncles are supposed to be. But then the comments became more frequent, more specific. He would comment on her body, on what she was wearing, on how she looked when she came out of the shower. Victoria started changing her routine, started wearing baggier clothes, started avoiding common areas of the house when she knew he would be there. But Peter wasn't the only one. Clinton started finding reasons to be alone with her, asking her to help him with something in the garage, calling her into the backyard to look at something that needed fixing. During these moments, he would stand too close, would touch her shoulder or her back in ways that lasted too long, would make comments about how she's the only one in the family who really understands him. And Jude, quiet Jude, would watch. He would be there in the background, observing, saying nothing, but his presence felt heavy, felt wrong. Victoria started to feel like she was being hunted in her own home. She would hear footsteps outside her bedroom door late at night when her mother was at work. She would find her things moved, her diary opened, her phone mysteriously unlocked. She started sleeping with a chair against her door, started taking showers only when her brother was home, started making excuses to be anywhere but in that house. But where could she go? This was her family. This was her home. And every time she tried to bring up her discomfort to her mother, even in the vaguest terms, her mother would shut it down. The uncles are helping us, Victoria. Don't be disrespectful. Don't make up stories. Don't bring shame on this family. So Victoria learned to be quiet. She learned to avoid. She learned to live in a constant state of tension, always on guard, always watching, always afraid. Then came the night when all three were in the house and no one else was. If you believe stories like this need more awareness, pause and comment, speak up. Your engagement helps this reach more people who might be going through something similar, who might need to know they're not alone, who might find the courage to break their own silence. It was a Thursday in late September. Victoria's mother had picked up an extra shift at the hospital. Her brother was sleeping over at a friend's house for a school project, and Victoria thought she would finally have the house to herself for once. She had an exam the next day and needed to study without interruption, without that constant feeling of being watched. She made herself dinner, microwaved leftovers, and settled into her room with her textbook spread across her bed. That's when she heard the front door open. She heard Clinton's voice first, then Peter's laugh, then the sound of Jude's keys hitting the table in the hallway. Victoria's stomach dropped. She texted her mother asking when she would be home. The response came back, hours. Emergency at the hospital. Probably won't be back until morning. Victoria locked her bedroom door. She turned off her lights and pretended to be asleep, hoping they would leave her alone, hoping they would just watch television and fall asleep like they usually did. But around midnight, there was a knock on her door. Clinton's voice, low and steady, asking her to come out, saying they needed to talk to her about something important. Victoria pretended not to hear. The knocking became louder, more insistent. Then she heard Peter's voice, teasing, calling her name like they were playing hide and seek. Then Jude said something she couldn't quite make out, but his tone was different from anything she had heard from him before. There was an edge to it, something that made her blood run cold. Victoria grabbed her phone and thought about calling someone, but who would she call? The police? And say what? That her uncles were knocking on her door? That she felt unsafe in her own home? What if she was wrong? What if she was overreacting? What would happen to her family if she made accusations that she couldn't prove? These thoughts paralyzed her for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. And then the door opened. She had locked it. She was sure she had locked it. But Clinton had a key. Of course he had a key. He had fixed that lock months ago. He had keys to everything in this house. Victoria froze, not because she wanted to, but because her mind couldn't process what was happening. Her body shut down, went into a mode of survival that looked like compliance, but was actually terror. She couldn't scream, couldn't fight, couldn't do anything but disappear inside herself while her worst fears became reality. The details of that night are not something Victoria can speak about without crying, even now, even years later. What happened in that room was a violation so complete, so devastating, that it shattered every sense of safety she had ever known. When it was over, Clinton told her that no one would believe her if she said anything. Peter told her it was her fault for being so uptight all the time, that she should have just relaxed. Jude said nothing at all, just looked at her with eyes that showed no remorse, no recognition of her humanity. They left her room as casually as they had entered, and Victoria lay there on her bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like she had died but her body had forgotten to stop breathing. The next morning, Victoria called in sick to work and skipped her exam. She couldn't get out of bed, couldn't bring herself to face the world, couldn't imagine how she was supposed to go on pretending that everything was normal. Her mother came home that afternoon and asked why she wasn't at school. Victoria said she wasn't feeling well, which was the truest thing she had said in hours. She wasn't feeling well. She would never feel well again. In the days that followed, Victoria tried to act normal. She went to class, she went to work, she came home and avoided eye contact with everyone. But inside, she was fracturing. She couldn't sleep without having nightmares. She couldn't eat without feeling sick. She couldn't be in the house without feeling like the walls were closing in on her. The uncles continued to come around as if nothing had happened. Clinton would sit at the dinner table and talk about his day. Peter would joke around and ruffle her brother's hair. Jude would watch television in the living room with his feet up on the coffee table. And Victoria would sit there, silent, trying not to shake, trying not to scream, trying not to fall apart in front of everyone. She thought about telling her mother 100 times, but every time she opened her mouth to say the words, she would remember all the times her mother had defended the uncles, all the times she had dismissed Victoria's concerns, all the ways she had made it clear that family loyalty was more important than anything. What if her mother didn't believe her? What if her mother blamed her? What if speaking up destroyed the family and left Victoria with nothing? So she stayed quiet. She withdrew into herself, became a ghost in her own life. Her friends noticed the change, asked if she was okay, but she would just smile and say she was tired, stressed about school, nothing serious. The truth felt too big, too horrible, too dangerous to speak out loud. But silence has a cost. Victoria started missing more classes, stopped showing up to work, stopped answering texts from friends. She spent most of her time in her room with the door locked, with the chair pushed up against it, listening for footsteps, waiting for the next violation, living in a constant state of fear. Her mother was worried, but attributed it to stress, to being in her 20s, to the general difficulties of growing up. She had no idea that her daughter was being destroyed from the inside out. Then one small mistake, one tiny slip, would eventually expose everything. It started with a text message. Victoria had been confiding in her best friend, Maya, through carefully worded texts that never explicitly said what had happened, but hinted at something being very wrong. One day, Victoria left her phone on the kitchen counter while she took a shower. Her younger brother, innocently using her phone to look something up because his was dead, saw a message from Maya that said something along the lines of, "You need to tell someone what they did to you. This isn't okay. You can't keep protecting them." Victoria's brother didn't understand what the message meant, but it worried him enough that he mentioned it to her mother. Victoria's mother confronted her that evening, demanding to know what Maya was talking about, what she was hiding, what was going on. And for the first time in months, something broke inside Victoria. She couldn't hold it in anymore. The words came out in a flood, disjointed and sobbing and raw. She told her mother everything, about the comments, about the touching, about that night, about all the nights after when she had to see them sitting in her living room acting like nothing had happened. Her mother's reaction was not what Victoria had hoped for. There was shock, yes, but also denial, also anger, also something that looked a lot like blame. "How could you not tell me sooner? Why didn't you fight back? Are you sure you misunderstood what happened?" These questions felt like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. But Maya, who Victoria had been texting throughout this conversation, could hear what was happening and made a decision. She called the police. When the officers arrived at the house, Victoria's mother was furious, saying this was a family matter, that they didn't need outsiders involved, that this would destroy their reputation in the community. But the officers had a job to do, and once Victoria confirmed to them through tears that she had been assaulted by multiple family members, they had to investigate. Detectives were assigned to the case, and they soon realized this wasn't going to be simple. They interviewed Victoria multiple times, each interview requiring her to relive the worst night of her life in excruciating detail. They collected evidence from her room, from her phone, from anything that might support her account. And then they started interviewing the uncles. Clinton was calm and collected, said Victoria had always been dramatic, that she was probably making this up for attention. Peter laughed it off, said she must have misunderstood some innocent joking around, that kids these days are too sensitive. Jude said almost nothing, just repeated that he didn't know what she was talking about, that he had never touched her inappropriately. Their stories were rehearsed, coordinated, united. It was Victoria's word against 3 grown men who had no criminal records, who were respected in their community, who had alibis and character witnesses ready to vouch for them. The detectives knew that prosecuting this case would be difficult, but they also knew that Victoria was telling the truth. There was something in the way she spoke, in the way she flinched when they mentioned the uncles' names, in the way her entire body seemed to carry the weight of trauma that no one could fake. So they kept digging, and that's when they found out something crucial. Victoria wasn't the only one. During their investigation, detectives reached out to other family members and people in the community, asking carefully worded questions about the uncles, about their behavior, about whether anyone had ever felt uncomfortable around them. One of those conversations was with Victoria's cousin, Elena, who lived 2 states away. When the detective mentioned Victoria's allegations, Elena went quiet for a long time. Then she asked if she could call back later when she was alone. 2 hours later, Elena called from her car, parked in an empty lot, and told the detective that Clinton had assaulted her when she was 16. She had never told anyone because her parents had made it clear that family problems stayed in the family, that accusing someone like Clinton would tear the family apart, that she would be blamed for causing drama. She had carried that secret for 7 years, had moved away as soon as she could, had tried to pretend it never happened, but it had happened, and hearing that Victoria was going through the same thing, that Clinton was still out there hurting people, made her realize that her silence had allowed him to continue. The detective thanked her, told her she was brave for coming forward, and asked if she would be willing to make an official statement. Elena said yes. Then another cousin came forward, this time a male cousin who had been assaulted by Peter when he was 14. Then a former neighbor who had uncomfortable experiences with Jude when she used to babysit at their house. Then another woman from their church who had been too afraid to say anything because the uncles were so respected in the community. The case that had started as one woman's word against 3 men suddenly became a pattern, a history, a decade-long trail of abuse that the uncles had carefully hidden behind their reputations as family men. The police arrested all 3 of them on the same day, executing warrants simultaneously to prevent them from coordinating their stories or destroying evidence. Clinton was arrested at his construction site in front of his coworkers. Peter was arrested at home while eating breakfast. Jude was arrested at the warehouse during his shift. The charges were extensive: counts of assault, abuse of a dependent adult, false imprisonment, and more. The bail was set high, very high, because the judge understood the severity of what these men had done and the likelihood that they would try to intimidate witnesses if released. The community reacted with shock and division. Some people believed Victoria and the other victims, praised their courage, expressed horror at what had been happening behind closed doors. But others, especially those who had known the uncles for years, defended them. They said the accusations must be false, that the victims were lying for attention or money, that this was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Victoria's mother was caught in the middle. She wanted to believe her daughter, but she also couldn't reconcile the men she had known for decades with the monsters they were being described as. The family fractured, with some members taking Victoria's side and others refusing to speak to her. The trial took months to prepare. The prosecution built a case using not just Victoria's testimony, but the testimonies of multiple victims, forensic evidence, text messages, and expert witnesses who explained how abuse works in families, how grooming works, how perpetrators choose their victims and manipulate them into silence. The defense tried to paint the victims as vindictive, as confused, as seeking revenge for unrelated grievances. But as victim after victim took the stand and told their story, as the pattern became undeniable, the defense's arguments fell apart. Clinton was convicted on 8 counts, Peter on 6, Jude on 5. The sentencing hearing was emotional, with victims giving impact statements describing how the abuse had affected their lives, their relationships, their ability to trust anyone. Victoria stood in front of the courtroom, looked at the 3 men who had stolen her sense of safety, and said that for the first time in years, she felt heard. She felt believed. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she could start to heal. The uncles were each sentenced to significant prison time, ranging from 15 to 25 years depending on the severity and number of charges. They would be registered as offenders for life, would face restrictions even after their release, would carry the consequences of their actions for the rest of their lives. But for Victoria and the other victims, the end of the trial was not the end of their journey. Trauma doesn't just disappear because justice was served. Victoria spent years in therapy, working through the betrayal, the violation, the guilt she had carried for not speaking up sooner. She learned that none of it was her fault, that the blame belonged entirely to the men who made the choice to hurt her. She learned that trust is something that can be rebuilt, slowly, carefully, with the right people. And she learned that speaking up, even when it's terrifying, even when it costs you relationships, even when people don't believe you, is still the right thing to do. Because silence protects abusers. Silence allows them to continue. Silence makes you complicit in your own suffering. Today, Victoria is 30 years old, still healing, still growing, still learning how to exist in a world where the people who were supposed to protect her became the ones she needed protection from. She works as an advocate now, speaking to other survivors, helping them find their voices, helping them understand that they are not alone. She knows that her story is not unique, that thousands of people experience abuse within their families and never report it because the cost of speaking up seems too high. But she also knows that the cost of staying silent is even higher. Abuse thrives in silence, in shame, in the belief that family loyalty is more important than personal safety. But Victoria's courage to break that silence, to name what happened to her, to refuse to protect the people who hurt her, created a ripple effect that brought justice not just for her, but for every other victim who had been too afraid to speak up. That's the power of speaking up. That's why these stories matter. That's why we need to keep talking about this, keep believing survivors, keep holding abusers accountable, no matter who they are or how respected they might appear to be. If you or someone you know is going through something like this, you are not alone. There are resources. There are people who will believe you. There are ways to get help. Share this story. Leave a comment and tell me, do you think justice was truly served? Should family members who commit these crimes face harsher penalties than strangers? How do we as a society create spaces where victims feel safe enough to come forward before years of silence have passed? These are conversations we need to have, and your voice matters in that conversation. If this story impacted you, hit that like button, subscribe for more true stories that need to be told, and remember that speaking up is not betrayal. Staying silent when someone is being hurt, that's the real betrayal. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.